Okay, welcome back. Good evening. Hope everyone is doing well. So let's, sorry, I hope you guys can hear me there. And so there were some questions before we start today's lesson, which is chapter 5. There were quite a few questions on this week's homework, the chapter 4 homework. And so let me go over that real quick, and maybe we'll do another example for that as well. Because I had quite a few emails and questions about the calculation of the elasticity. So let me bring up the homework assignment, and then I'll go over that real quick. Okay, so we had an example like this in the chapter 4 study guide, and this was a similar example, but I think there was some confusion, or just maybe I didn't explain well enough how to do the calculation. And so I think you guys got the demand curve part, where you just kind of plot the points and draw a straight line and that represents the demand curve. What I think the questions were about is calculating the elasticity. Okay, and I used, I had a formula that I gave in the study guide, and it's the same formula that we use on this homework assignment, which is just kind of the percent change over the percent change. And so I think, let me just show you kind of how I got to the answer on this one. And then maybe we can do one more example, if I can find one, and then I think that'll give us an idea. So I know that okay, so here are my solutions, and let me just show you how I got to the elasticity calculation. Okay, so we only have two data points, which means we're interested in how demand responds when the price of kale goes up from $2.50 to $3, and you can see the response in demand, it goes down from 1,000 to 500 bunches. So we're trying just to calculate the responsiveness of this demand change to that price change, right? So part B, what is the price of, when the price of kale rises from $2.50 to $3, what's the price elasticity of demand for kale? And so the formula that I used was this one. So remember, we're trying to represent the responsiveness, so that's just the percent change. Percent change in quantity demanded divided by the percent change in price. Okay, and I broke that down into, you have these two data points. The first observation, or like point A being 0, so like Q0 is the first point, and Q1 is the newer point. So the quantity responds from Q0 to Q1, so it's just like the general term. So you're basically trying to get just the percent change over the original value. So how much did the quantity change when the price moved? Alright, and then the same thing for price. So price went up here from 250 to 3. So the original price is P0, and then the newer price, or the higher price, is P1. So this simple percent change formula represents percent change in demand over percent change in price. So if you just plug in the numbers, okay, so Q1 is the new quantity after the change. So that's 500. The quantity went down to 500. So Q1 is 500 minus the original quantity, which is 1,000. So the original quantity was 1,000. And then just divide that by the original quantity. Okay, so you get basically the change over the original. So it's going to come out to a negative number because demand, see how demand went from 1,000 to 500. So demand went down, so the change was negative. But if you still do the calculation the same, it'll come out exactly correct. And then P1 is the new price. The new price is $3. And P0 is the old price, which was $2.50. So $3 minus $2.50 over $2.50. Okay, so you just all you have to do is plug in the points for this general equation. And if you put this, you do this on a piece of paper or in a calculator, it should come out to exactly negative 2.5. Okay, and you can clearly see that if you take the absolute value or remove the negative sign, that demand responds a lot more than the price change, and therefore the 2.5 is bigger than 1. So that's going to confirm or show that kale here is relatively elastic. So I think there's a formula like in the textbook or even in the PowerPoint presentation, which I kind of skipped because I didn't want to use it because it's the midpoint formula. So don't use that one because it'll come out slightly different. Okay, let me show you what I'm talking about. Is ED always absolute value? It doesn't matter because so you can leave it as a negative. Oh, privately. Okay, let me show you the PowerPoint from last week. Okay, so in chapter 4, and on slide 4 from chapter 4, there's a formula here that's like, this is the midpoint formula. So I never use this formula because I don't really like it. And you can use it, your answer will be similar, but it'll be slightly different because the formula is different. But this is a different way to do the elasticity calculation. And if you use this formula, you probably get a different answer than what I got for the even negative 2.5 or 2.5. So you're welcome to use this formula, but you're going to get a different answer. So I'd recommend not using it. Just use the one that I use because it gives you the absolute percent change. Because this formula is slightly I don't want to say incorrect, but kind of, because this formula assumes that going like a price increase or a price decrease are the exact same thing, and that's not true because the elasticity is different whether you go up or down the demand curve. And so, although the calculation is going to be pretty similar, like mathematically, this equation's incorrect for elasticity because it assumes that an increase in price is the same as a decrease in price in terms of demand responsiveness, and technically that's not correct. So if you use this formula, you probably got something slightly different. And if you really like this formula, you can use it, but I recommend using the other one that I presented because I think it's a little more accurate. Okay, so I could probably find another example here, but so for this one, for the homework assignment, which is due today, did I answer your questions on this? So I had some questions from my notes. Let me see here. So Alexis and Lauren, you both emailed me on this question. So is it clear how I got the answer? Do you have
Yes.
yes?
Yeah, makes perfect sense.
Okay, great. Okay, so the point is this formula here that I believe is in the study guide for chapter 4, right? Yeah. So in the study guide we went over from last week, the chapter 4 study guide. So the formula is here, the same one. So just I'd recommend for this type of question, always use that formula. So just kind of copy and paste it or keep it handy, and that's the formula you need. You don't have to memorize it because everything is take home and online. So use that formula, and all you gotta do is plug in the points. And just know that the ones like Q1 and P1, that is the newer price, like when it goes to point B when it changes. And the zeros, Q0 and P0, those are the original points, usually point A, so before the change. So all you gotta do is plug in the numbers and then do the calculation. And also one more thing, there were a few questions on, I got an email and then someone just asked about the negative sign. So, like, some textbooks report elasticity as, like, it just without the negative sign, so 0.2. It doesn't really matter if they're both technically correct. So as long as you get this, as long as you get it, like for part B, you can answer it. Okay. So I got one more question there, but let me finish this one first. So this is back on the study guide from last week. Okay, so for this one, you could answer Okay, so you can say it's negative 0.2 or 0.2, so it just matters how you like to present it. Technically, they're both correct. Okay, and what is important is determining if it's inelastic or elastic. And so here, I usually leave it with a negative sign, but so I have it as negative 0.2. So you want to compare the elasticity with, like, is it bigger than, less than, or equal to 1? And remember, elastic is, okay, so I'll just put elastic as well. Well, yeah, but this is for the, so, okay, so after you get the elasticity, so you use the formula. Then you get your answer is either 0.2 or negative 0.2. It doesn't matter, they're both correct. Okay, and then you want to compare that number to 1. So you want to take the absolute value, which is just remove the negative sign, and see if it's bigger than, less than, or equal to 1. So remember this comparison we did in the PowerPoint? And so after you get the elasticity, you take the absolute value, and then if it's bigger than 1, it's relatively elastic, or it's elastic, okay? If it's less than 1, it's inelastic. Alright, so that's all you have to do but make sure you remove the negative sign when you're doing this check for inelastic and elastic. So like, if it comes out to like negative 2, then an absolute value that's bigger than 1, that's elastic. Okay? So this one from the study guide, the elasticity came out is negative 0.2. In absolute value, that's less than 1. Okay, so that's relatively inelastic. Now the other one from the homework that you just did, that one is negative 2.5. Okay, if you take the absolute value, which is 2.5, that's bigger than 1, so that one's elastic. Okay, so make sure that on the homework assignment it's elastic. Right, that one should have came out to negative 2.5 or 2.5, and the Kale one, the homework one, is elastic. Okay, so I was trying to show you the difference between well, the first example was inelastic, and this example was elastic. Okay, and hopefully that makes sense. So basically, like, maybe I could, let me just see if I can write steps here. Okay, so that's all you have to do. Step one, calculate the elasticity by using the general percent change formula, which is this one. Okay, and step two, take the absolute value, or get rid of the negative sign. And then step three, compare that to 1 to determine if it's inelastic or elastic. So if it's an absolute value, right, take away the negative sign. If it's less than 1, inelastic. If it's bigger than 1, elastic. Alright, and that's it. Okay, so, and we'll probably have one of those, on the take-home midterm. And so I know I'll try to prepare another example that we can go over again next week just to make sure, but, any questions on, is this clear how to do this? Everyone good on the homework? Any questions on, how to do this type of question now? I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
I understand now. I think it's clear.
Okay. Okay, so it seems like I've answered the questions on this one, and so sorry if that was confusing. I think we got it now. But we all know everyone knows the answer for the homework, which is negative 2.5, and how to do that. When we do the review for the take-home midterm, I'll try to go over another one in class next week just to confirm that we understand it. But yeah, the process is the same. Just take the numbers, calculate the elasticity, and then after that, take the absolute value, compare it to 1, and it should make sense if it's more responsive or less responsive for inelastic versus inelastic. Okay, so we'll move on to today's material, but again, let me know if there's additional questions on the elasticity question. Okay, so today we're going to do chapter 5, which is on public goods and externalities, and then this will conclude the first third of the class, and then we'll pause here before we learn new material. Next week we'll do a review, we'll do some practice questions, and then next week I'll give you your take-home final, which is just like a longer homework assignment, which will be due like in 2 weeks from tonight. Okay, so you have the chapter 5 homework after we do chapter 5, which will be next Wednesday. And then you'll have the midterm, which I'll give you next week, which will be due the next Wednesday. What day is that? October 7th, next month. All right, let's start chapter 5. Okay, so you can open up the chapter 5 study guide. Oh yeah, so one more thing before we start today's lesson is I put some of your homework grades up because I got through the grading of the first I want to say 3 assignments, and so you should, in the grade center, you should see your grades for the first 3 homeworks. So chapter 1 homework, chapter 2 homework, chapter 3 homework, I put your grades up for those. So double check those. Let me know if you have any questions about those. And then I put my solutions for those homework assignments in that area of Blackboard. So there are my homework solutions for the first 3 homeworks, which were due last Wednesday. So those are there. So okay, so homework grades are in Blackboard for chapters 1 through 3 assignments, and the homework solutions are in Blackboard for chapters 1 through 3 assignments. I'll try to update those regularly, but I extended the deadline for the first week's assignment, so I got all 3 there, so your grade should be viewable, and you can look at the solutions if you want, but let me know if you have any questions on that, but I'll keep updating your homework grades after the due dates and so on. All right, and then let's open up the PowerPoint for chapter 5. All right, here we go. Chapter 5, which is on public goods and externalities. Okay, let's start by just talking about market failures on slides 2 through 5, and that'll lead us to these the public goods sections. Okay, so we learned in the supply and demand chapter that if there's no market failures, if everything works correctly in the market, then suppliers and consumers kind of agree upon a price and quantity, and that determines the market price and market quantity if there's no market failures. But often there are market failures, which is what we're going to talk about in this chapter. Okay, so sometimes, markets work and supply and demand determines the correct price and quantity, but sometimes markets fail to do that, and you're left with either a situation that's either too much is produced or too little is produced. Okay, so if there's a market failure, you have to either have too much over allocation or too little under allocation. So something went wrong, and either it turned out to have too much produced in the market or too little. Either way, there's a market failure, and that's what we're going to discuss in this chapter. Okay, so the first type of failure is on the demand side. So if there's a demand side failure, normally this is because the consumers aren't charged the correct price. So basically, it's difficult to charge the consumers what they're willing to pay, and so what happens here is some people overpay for it, and then some people get the benefits without paying, and so this is a situation in which demand is a little bit lower than it should, and that's because the consumers that are buying the skidder service are paying too much. They're paying for benefits to go to a third party. Okay, so a demand side failure, demand is too low, and the consumers are overpaying. And there's also a supply side failure. So this is when a firm doesn't incur the full cost of production. So they're not paying for some cost that's associated with the market, and therefore, because they're not paying the full cost, they can supply more because they're not incurring costs they should. Okay, and there's some external costs of production that are not reflected in supply. So there's some costs that these firms or businesses should be paying for. They're not paying for them, and because of that, there's over-allocation or oversupply. So there's specific things we call these market failures, which are externalities. Okay, and that concept we're going to come to after we talk about public and private goods. But externalities basically mean that something external to the market, there's either a third-party cost that's taken on by a third party, or a third-party benefit that goes to a third party. So there's an external third party that either gets a benefit or has to pay a cost, and because of that, that's why there's market failures. Okay, so we'll come back to this when we talk about externalities in the latter slides, but supply side failure, too much is produced because firms aren't paying the full cost, and demand side failure, too little is produced because the consumers are paying too much. Okay, so we need now to discuss private goods and public goods on slides 7 and 8. So you're probably more familiar with private goods. So we'll start with that on slide 7. Okay, so private goods are produced in the market by firms. They're offered for sale, and there's two distinct characteristics of a private good. Okay, the first is rivalry, and this means that like when one person consumes it, it's off the market, and so it's rivalry. Like once the good is consumed, it's gone, and so it's rivalry in the sense that once one person consumes it or buys it, it's off the market. Okay, and excludability is the other characteristic of a private good, and this means that there's a price tag on the skidder service, and if the consumer is not willing to pay that price, then they're excluded from the market. Okay, so these are the two characteristics of private goods. Rivalry, once it's consumed, it's gone. And excludability, if you don't want to pay the price tag, then you don't get to consume it. Alright, so there's many examples of private goods. Most goods are private goods. They're produced by firms in the market. So just to name a few, there's thousands more I can think of, but so these types of goods are all produced by private firms, and you have to buy them from a private firm, and there's a price tag, and and you can see how the characteristics apply here. So cars, shoes, or kitchenware, once one consumer buys that good or service, it's off the market. So that takes care of rivalry, and then the firms put a price tag on these goods here, and if the consumer doesn't want to pay that price, then they're excluded from the market. Okay, so there's many examples of private goods, but these are good ones here. Cars, shoes, or kitchenware. You can probably think of thousands of other ones. All right, the other type of good that's unique or that's new in this chapter is public goods. So let's look at public goods on slide 8. All right, so this is the next slide. Okay, so public goods, you probably know the difference between the private sector, which is private firms, and the public sector, which is government jobs, etc. And so the same thing here. Public goods are provided by the government, which is a public service, or a public enterprise. So private goods are produced by firms, the private sector. Public goods are produced by the government, or provided by the government, which is the public sector. Okay, so there's the characteristics for a public good are the complete opposite of a private good. So it's non-rivalry is the characteristic because one person consuming it doesn't prevent you from using it. So this is a good or service in which multiple consumers can enjoy at the same time. And it's non-excludability because there's no specific price tag on these goods or services. They're provided from tax dollars, and so therefore this type of good or service, non-rivalry, a bunch of or multiple consumers can consume it at the same time, and non-excludability, which means you're not excluded because the price has already been kind of internalized in the tax revenue that went to go pay for this public good or service. Okay, so can we think of examples of what represents public goods? So what are some examples of public goods in which basically tax dollars fund these goods and services, and they're provided by the public sector? So what are some examples that you can think of that would be public goods? Okay, any ideas? Yeah, there you go. So yeah, public parks, law enforcement, and law enforcement, tax dollars pay for that. That's a public good. Exactly. Yep, yeah, that's correct. Okay, yeah, so we get the idea that these are goods which tax dollars pay for these goods and services, and then the public sector provides them. So you can see that all of these things, multiple people can get benefits from the good or service at the same time. Like multiple people can use the parks or the roads. They can call law enforcement. You can use the libraries, and everybody technically gets benefits for national defense. And there's no you don't have to pay out of pocket. The tax revenue goes to fund these things for the public sector, and so you can see how both of these characteristics, both of these apply here because you can see how these goods and services don't create rivalries and don't exclude people based on the specific price tag. Okay, and there's a reason why some goods don't go in the private sector and become public, or don't go in the private sector and become public. Yeah, because of this situation or problem called the free rider problem. Okay, and I put that definition here. I put a definition here of free rider. So with non-rivalry and non-excludability, public goods suffer from the free rider problem. So the free rider problem means that many people can benefit from the goods without paying, making it unprofitable for firms to produce these goods since they have no way to ensure that only paying customers will enjoy the goods. Okay, so these markets fail because private firms aren't able to regulate the market, and they can't charge people a fair price. So therefore, private firms don't want to deal with public parks or public roads, and they're left to the public sector because if they were done privately, it's impossible to charge everyone the same price, and you'll get some people to pay more and some people to pay less. So you get this free rider problem because some people would pay more, and some people will pay less or not pay at all. Okay, so public goods are goods that have a free rider problem. They normally become public goods because firms don't want to provide those goods and services because they can't properly charge. And so the goods that have that problem become public or tend to become public. And the goods in which you can charge consumers a price that they have to pay, like cars, shoes, and kitchenware, those stay in the private sector because there's not really a free rider problem in those markets. And so you can kind of see like what goes in the private sector and what goes in the public sector because of the unableness for firms to charge a true price. That's when it goes to the public sector. Okay, so next concept is externalities. And so this will tie back into the market failures. But let's talk about externalities, and there's going to be two types. There'll be negative externalities and then positive externalities. We'll start on slides 12 to 13. Okay, so remember in the top of the PowerPoint we talked about market failures, and there was either a demand side or a supply side failure. So either too much or too little was produced. And so this is where this externalities economic term comes in, because there's something happening that's external to the market, and that's the result of a market failure. Okay, so an externality means it means exactly what it says. There's something external going on in this private market. So cost of benefit accrued, or a cost of benefit accruing to a third party, external to the transaction is an externality. So there's a market, there's buyers, there's sellers, but if there's a third party which incurs a cost or gets a benefit external to that market, that's where the concept of externalities comes in. So if there's an external positive, if there's a positive externality, some external benefit is going to a third party. So this is a demand side failure where too little is produced, and that's because the consumers who are buying it are internalizing a benefit that goes to a third party. Okay, a negative externality is where too much is produced, and this is a supply side failure because the firms aren't paying the full cost, and there's a third party cost that is external to the market that goes to that third party. So I think the negative externality one is more the best place to start. Let's see if we can think of some examples of what might result in a negative externality. Okay, so can we think of any examples of a market failure that would lead to a negative externality? So what's a market that might fail, like in the private sector, and lead to a cost that's incurred by a third party that's external to this market? Or if we just think of what would be what's the negative externality that might be incurred to a third party? Like what's something bad that comes from a market failure? Okay, so it's kind of a new concept if you haven't talked about externalities. So the one I usually start with, let's start with the externality itself. Okay, so the classic example of a negative externality in economics is pollution, or more specifically carbon emissions. And so there's many markets in the energy and carb industry in which emissions or carbon emissions are the result of the market. And a lot of times if there's not regulation, the market will go on without the firms properly paying for that pollution. Right? So they're passing a third party cost to people that aren't involved in the market. And because of that, they're producing too much. So a market which might lead to pollution being a third-party externality is, here are some of those. Okay, so these are some typical markets that could fail and lead to pollution as a third party cost. So basically, the market that fails is the market for automobiles or the market for electricity, and the third party cost, the externality, the negative externality in this case, is the pollution. Okay, so there's a market failure in one of these markets or other markets, and the negative externality is the pollution. Okay, so we're gonna look at a graph in a minute, and then we're gonna talk about positive externalities as well. But do we see does this make sense? How we have a market that fails, and then we have a third party benefit that incurs a cost, which is external to the market, and so if we can understand the examples here where buyers and sellers in the automobile market, if the sellers aren't paying the true cost, including the pollution, then they'll oversupply, right? And the third party cost goes to the people in the surrounding area that get the pollution. The same with the electricity. So the market failure occurs in one of these two markets, and then the negative externality is the pollution. Okay, so let's stick with the negative externality one first. So the first panel is, so here's so panel A, you see a supply and demand curve for the negative externality. So this ST is the true cost supply curve. But what happens is the true cost is not realized by these firms, so they don't pay some of the cost, so they oversupply. So see how this the supply curve in the market is the supply increases beyond what it should be because they're not paying the true cost. And so this increase in supply due to not paying the full cost of pollution or whatever is the externality. So this over allocation, okay, the supply side failure, this is how you represent the negative externality in the supply and demand market. So this is the over allocation due to oversupply from a negative externality. Okay, so how about a positive externality? So this one is a demand side failure. And here too little is produced, and that's because the consumers are paying too much, and they're paying for some benefits that go to a third party. Alright, so this one's a little trickier, but let's see if we can think of examples of markets that fail and lead to a third party benefit. Okay, so can you think of any examples of a market that might fail that would lead to a third party benefit, which means that benefits are received by a third party that's not directly involved in the transaction or the market? So what are some markets that might lead to external benefits to a third party? Okay, well let me see if I can run some by you here. All right, let's start with this one. So you know that there's so K through 12 education is provided by the public sector in pretty much anywhere in the United States. Now, the reason why that's done by the private sector is because of a positive externality that would occur if it was privatized. I mean, you can still go to private schools, but K through 12 public education is available for pretty much anywhere in the United States. And so if the reason why that is the case is because if K through 12 was only private, the price would be a lot higher, and people that weren't involved in the initial, people that weren't involved in the actual transaction would get benefits that aren't involved in the education system. So if okay, so this is how this is the argument for K through 12 being a public service or provided by the public sector. So because there would be if it was only privatized, there would be many third-party benefits. So the price would be higher because only those involved in the school would be paying the price. So like the teachers and the people paying the price would be the parents, and the suppliers would be the school. But you can see that how there would be benefits that go to a third party that aren't involved in the school at all. So there's benefits such as you have more educated employees, you have less crime, you have things that go along with public education, and this is why most people are willing to pay for K through 12 public education with tax revenue, because pretty much everyone gets a benefit, not just the kids and students that go to that school. Okay, so another example of a positive externality. Okay, so let's see if this makes sense. So another positive externality example would be the market for flu shots. So this is, there might be some public areas that provide this, but for the most part, this is still a private sector. And what I'm saying here is that this might reflect a positive externality because not everyone gets flu shots, and so therefore only the people who pay for the flu shot are involved in the transaction, but the rest of the population that gets the benefits of those people that get flu shots gets kind of a free third-party benefit. So if you get a benefit from other people getting flu shots, like you don't get sick or there's just a healthier population, then that doesn't seem like a problem, but that's a market failure, because in theory the people or the individuals that are buying the flu shots are paying a little bit higher price because they're paying for the benefits that go to people who didn't get the flu shot. Okay, so positive externalities are a little bit more, I think, a little more confusing to understand, but I think those are good examples. Where if you look at if K through 12 education was only private, there'd clearly be a positive externality that went to third parties not involved. And also with flu shots now, it seems to occur that third parties get benefits that don't pay for the actual transaction. Okay, so questions about these examples of negative externalities or positive externalities, or kind of how the logic works here? Any questions? Does this make sense? Okay. So back to the graph here. So on slide 11, we looked before at the negative externality graph, like the oversupply is what results in negative externality, and then over here, the positive externality. This is when like demand is too low because the consumers are paying a higher price than they would otherwise incur. So if there was a market failure leading to a third-party benefit in like the K through 12 education market, demand would be too low. Okay, and the same would occur in the flu shot market. So basically what the graphical analysis shows that in the negative externality, there's oversupply because firms aren't paying the true cost of pollution or whatever. So that's this one. And then in the positive externality example, demand is too low because they're paying for the benefit, like more educated kids and healthier population, less risk of flu shots, and less risk of influenza. And so that's when demand is too low because they're subsidizing the third party, and then we have underproduction. Okay, so let me know if we have questions on the two types of externalities. I know it's kind of a new, might be a little confusing concept, but so the next thing we have to talk about is how the government can step in. Do you have a question? Okay, so if we have externalities, if we have markets that fail leading to either third-party benefits or third-party costs, then there's ways that you can try to fix those situations, and that's methods for dealing with externalities on slides 14 to 17. Okay, so you can try to correct negative externalities if there's oversupply. By direct controls, you can just like limit the supply of something. You can have taxes and use that tax revenue to kind of pay for the third-party costs. Okay, and for positive externalities, you can have government provisions, or you can have subsidies. You can pay you can pay the people involved, and so they get subsidized, and they actually get the benefits. So they're getting, even though they're overpaying, they're getting some benefit, and so it offsets. And both of these things can help fix the market failure, the result from externalities. Okay, so here we have a tax that's correcting the negative externalities. So here's the negative externalities here in panel A. And so if this market is failing and leading to a third-party cost, let's say it's pollution, then what you can do is you can tax the suppliers and then use that revenue to pay the people that are affected or try to clean up the pollution. Okay, so see how they're taxed this amount? And because of the tax, we know taxes decrease supply. So if they decrease the supply to the correct, they're paying the true cost now. And then what happens is you use that tax revenue, the government does, to try to offset the costs of pollution or whatever it is. Okay, so this is graphically how you would correct for the negative externalities. So here's the true supply curve. Here's the externality with overproduction. You tax it, so it goes back to the true cost supply curve, back to the original optimal amount, and then this tax revenue goes to fund or to fix the pollution that went to the third party. Okay, you can also correct the positive externality situation with subsidies to either suppliers or consumers. Okay, so there's your positive externalities where demand is too low because they're subsidizing a third-party benefit, such as more educated population or healthier population, etc. So here is the true cost demand curve, and here's the lower demand curve because they're paying a higher price, so demand decreases. All right, and so to fix that, you can give those consumers a subsidy, and so the demand curve shifts out because they get subsidized, and it gets back to the optimal allocation quantity. Or you can also subsidize the supplier, and they increase supply. So the point is to get, instead of under allocation, back to the optimal allocation, which is Q0. Okay, so you can do that by subsidizing either the demand side, the consumers, or subsidizing the suppliers. Either way, demand shifts or supply shifts, you get back to the optimal market quantity. Okay, so to summarize the kind of the cause or the definition of the externalities and then how to fix it or ways you could possibly fix it. So this is a nice chart because it shows the problem and then how you might fix it. So negative externalities, you have spillover costs that go to a third party. Okay, you have overproduction because the firms are supplying too much. They're not paying for that third party cost. And so ways in which the government can step in and try to fix it are listed here. So you can have private bargaining if it's just like a few small parties. You can make sure you allocate the property rights properly and just like make an agreement to see who pays the full cost. You can have liability rules or lawsuits if there's a third party that's not getting third party cost that's not getting paid for by the firm. You can tax the producers, which would make them pay the true cost, like we did here. You can have direct controls, which means just like make a law that you can't supply more than this amount. Okay, or what's often done, especially in the case of pollution, is you can have a third-party market for externality rights. So you can create a separate third-party market in which the right to pollute or the right to emit CO2 emissions becomes an actual market. And so therefore, if the firm is paying for the cost of pollution, if they want to pollute more, they got to pay more. Right? If they want to pollute less, they can sell their pollution permits to companies that want to pollute more. So if the third-party externality market like is set up properly, then those firms of which want to pollute more have to pay more, and those firms that don't pollute as much don't have to pay as much. Okay, so you might be familiar with a concept called cap and trade, and that's exactly creating a market for a third party, which is pollution. And so if you've heard of the term cap and trade, it just means that, so we're talking about markets that cause pollution, okay? And so if pollution is a problem, if pollution is the negative externality, what you can do and what's been done is you put a cap, like this is the maximum amount of pollution that can be emitted, and then you divide that amount in separate like pollution permits, and then those firms that have permits, they can pollute that much. But if they have to pollute more, they have to buy permits from someone else. And so the market kind of works out where if you're not willing to pay for more pollution, you can't do it. But if you are, you have to pay for those extra pollution permits. So you create a cap on how much pollution can be emitted, and then the firms trade based on who has to pollute more. Okay, and then quickly to sum up positive externalities. So we know that those are under allocation due to a demand side failure. Okay, you can try to fix this with private bargaining, or probably more effectively, you can subsidize consumers or producers, which we did in the previous slide. Okay, so here's the externality, the positive externality. under allocation, and if you give these consumers a subsidy, they increase supply, or if you give these firms a subsidy, they increase. If you give the consumers a subsidy, they increase demand, and if you give the firms a subsidy, they increase supply. Either way, you correct for the under allocation, and now you have the true amount, which is Q0. Okay, so you got the subsidies, or you can just have a government provision like we had with K through 12 being provided by the public sector. So all these, I think we kind of understand what the two types of externalities are, and then these are ways in which the government can step in and try to correct the market failure. Okay, so questions thus far on externalities? Anything we talked about in this little section? Okay, let's move on to the last key concept, which is different types of taxes. Okay, so let's talk about progressive and proportional and regressive taxes on slides 21 and 20 to 21. Okay, so we won't spend too much time on taxes, but I just want you all to know how the different types work and how to calculate some of those. So there's three types: a progressive, regressive, or proportional tax. Okay, so progressive tax, that implies that your average tax rate increases when your income goes up. So when income rises, the average tax rate increases. It's progressive. If your average tax rate declines as income increases, then that's by definition a regressive tax. It regresses as income increases. Or it could be just directly proportional to your income level. And so if the average tax rate stays the same as income increases or decreases, then it's just proportional. Okay, so those are the three types. We're going to do some examples on how to calculate those. And then I think the next slide has a couple or some examples on what specific taxes go into these types. Okay, so personal income taxes, we know, especially in the United States, are progressive. So this means that as you make more and more income, your tax rate increases. So the average tax rate increases as your income level increases. And so sales tax is actually regressive because it's like, let's say sales tax is like 10%. So it's 10% of the good or service. So if you make more income, you're still paying the 10%. So as a proportion of your income, or as you make more income, the tax rate actually declines because you're paying the same amount as people in lower income brackets. The sales tax rate is the same, but your income increases. So if the average tax rate, like as a proportion of your income, goes down, which it would for sales tax, because the sales tax rate is always the same for like candy bars or things like that, then technically that's a regressive system, because if you make more income, as a proportion of your income, you're paying less tax. Okay, and then an example of a proportional tax, which is proportional to how much the corporation makes, would be a corporate tax, because that's directly proportional to the income or the revenue generated by the corporation. Okay, so let's go back to the study guide. Okay, so we got some some optional videos. If you want to watch more about public and private good, there's a nice video there. This one explains some more on externalities, so I'd recommend looking at that one, and then some more on taxes. So I think the most difficult concept in this chapter is externalities, and probably even more specifically the positive externalities. So take a look at this video when you get a chance. And if you have the textbook, I'd recommend reading this section on externalities because it's an important concept, but I think it's a difficult one. So I tried to explain it, but hopefully what I explained for positive and negative externalities came across. But I think that's one of the most difficult, or kind of, especially in this chapter, kind of a new concept. Okay, let's look at some examples. Okay, number one, let's just contrast the characteristics of public goods with those of private goods, and why won't private firms produce public goods? Okay, so we know from the lecture in the chapter that the two characteristics of private goods are rivalry and excludability, whereas the opposite is true. The two characteristics of public goods are non-rivalry and non-excludability. So to be one of those two types, you have to check both boxes for the characteristics. Okay, and then why won't private firms produce public goods? So private firms won't produce public goods because of the free rider problem, and it's impossible or difficult to charge everyone the full price. So private firms don't want to do that, and this is why these goods and services become public, because private firms fail to price properly for all the consumers due to the problem of the free riders, and some people pay more than others, and so on. So if there's a free rider situation, most likely or often, that good of service will become and be provided by the public sector. Okay, and then number two, let's show graphically how a tax can correct for a negative externality and how subsidies can correct for positive externalities. Okay, so I just took this from the chapter. Alright, so you're not going to do, this won't be on the homework and this won't be on the exams, but here, I just wanted you to understand graphically kind of how the externalities work and can be fixed. So here's a negative externality, oversupply, overproduction. Then the tax makes the firms realize the true cost. They decrease supply, and that fixes the overallocation, and the tax revenue goes to the third parties that are affected by the pollution or whatever it is. Okay, and this other one down here, this is again the positive externality and fixing that with subsidies. So positive externalities, demand side failure is too little for this because they're subsidizing a third party benefit. To fix that, give the consumers, the demanders, a subsidy, then they increase demand to the proper amount, or give the firms a subsidy and they increase supply to the proper amount. Either way, you're trying to fix from that under allocation. Okay, number 3. So number 3 and number 4 are on taxes, and the homework assignment for this chapter is just a couple questions on taxes. So let's run through these. And if you have questions on how I did the tax problems, make sure you ask them, because there's a couple homework questions on the tax examples. So number 3, let's suppose the tax is such that an individual with an income of $10,000 pays $2,000 of tax, a person with an income of $20,000 pays $3,000 of tax, a person with an income of $30,000 pays $4,000 of tax, and so forth. And the question is, what is each person's average tax rate? Is this tax regressive, proportional, or progressive? Okay, so we have 3 individuals. Let's calculate their average tax. That's just what proportion of their income is paid to taxes. So the first person makes $10,000, they pay $2,000 of tax. So 2,000 out of 10,000. Okay, so 2,000 divided by 10,000 is 0.2. And so that's 20%, or 20% of the income is paid to taxes. The next individual, 3,000 out of 20,000. Okay, that comes out to 0.5, which is 15%. So 3,000 is 15% of 20,000. And then the third person makes 30,000 and 4,000 is paid to taxes. So 4,000 divided by 30,000 is about 0.13. So that's about 13%. So the average tax rates are 20%, 15%, and 13%. And you can see that as income increases, the average tax rate declines. So this would be a regressive system. Okay, and then number 4. All right, so this is a good one on taxes, because you can see how your income is taxed based on different income brackets. So suppose in Fiscalville there's no tax on the first 10,000 income, but a 20% tax on earnings between 10,000 and 20,000, a 30% tax on income between 20,000 and 30,000, and then any income above 30,000 is taxed at 40%. So if your income is 50,000, how much will you pay in taxes? Let's determine your marginal and average tax rates, and then finally, is this a progressive tax? Okay, so first part is just list kind of a table or a chart of what the tax rates are for different income brackets. So you know that for the first 10,000, there's no tax. Income earned between 10,000 and 20,000 is taxed at 20%. Income from 20,000 to 30,000 is taxed at 30%, and then anything above 30,000 is taxed at 40%. Okay, so the question is, if your income is 50,000, how much will you pay in taxes? So make a note that you only get taxed above certain amounts. So if you make 50,000, you don't pay you don't get charged 40% of all that. It's only income earned above the 30,000 mark. So you have to go to the separate income brackets to calculate taxes. So if you make 50,000, that's above 40,000, or that's above 30,000. So that's income above that is taxed at 40%. But the income earned below that is only taxed at these rates. So see how this is how you do it. So let's start with the lowest bracket. Okay, so the first 10,000 you earn is still taxed at 0%. Alright, so this is going to come out to 0, but I just put it in there to be thorough. So you pay 0% of the first 10,000. So that's that. Okay. Then you pay 20% of the income earned between 10,000 and 20,000. So there's $10,000 that are taxed to you at 20%. Okay, so you pay 20% of this range. Then you pay 30% of income earned in this range, which is a total of 10,000. So you pay 30% of this 10,000 earned, and then only the additional is taxed at 40%. So if your income is 50,000, the first 10,000 is taxed at 0%. The second 10,000 is taxed at 20%. The next 10,000 is taxed at 30%, and only the remainder is taxed at 40%. So you can see what's left is 20,000. So 10,000 plus 10,000 plus 10,000 is 30,000. So the rest, which is 20,000, is taxed at 40%. Okay, so if you did this whole calculation, you'd get that your taxes paid were 13,000. So the point is it's not just 40% of 50,000. You have to do it like this because you're only taxed above the income bracket. Okay, and then the marginal tax rate is the tax rate on the next dollar earned. And if you're already in the highest income bracket, then each additional dollar earned is going to be taxed at 40%. So let me write that here in the chat. Okay, so the marginal tax rate is the tax rate on the next or the marginal dollar earned. So, for example, if you were at if you made $10,000 and if you made exactly $10,000, then your marginal tax rate would be $20,000 because the next dollar earned gets taxed at 20%. So if the next dollar earned puts you into a different tax bracket, then the marginal tax rate is the next tax bracket. But in this case, we've already reached the highest tax level, and so each dollar earned, the marginal dollar, is going to be taxed at 40%. So the marginal tax rate is 40%. Okay, and then the average tax rate is how much you pay in taxes relative to your income. So just take income and divide it, or take taxes paid and divide it by your total income. So we paid 13,000 in taxes. Divide that by 50,000, and we get 0.26. So that means exactly 26% of our income went to taxes. Okay, so see how it's not 40%. When you do the full calculation, it's only, in this case, 26%. Okay, and then finally, this is a progressive tax because as your income increases, your tax rate also increases. So when the average tax rate increases as your income increases, that's by definition a progressive tax. Okay, so there's one of these on the homework assignment and probably another one on the take-home midterm. So questions on what we did here in this example, how to calculate the taxes paid, how to get the average tax rate, and to do this type of problem. Questions on this one? Okay, so everyone sees how this the calculation works based on the income levels and the tax rates. Okay, let's look at the homework assignment for chapter 5. All right, so the chapter 5 homework, we just have a couple questions on taxes. So the first one, and these are similar to what we did in the examples and the study guide. The first one, you have to calculate. You just have individuals that pay a certain amount of their income in taxes. You just have to calculate each person's average tax rate or tax rate. Okay, and then based on that, determine if it's progressive, proportional, or regressive. Okay, and then you get another one on different tax brackets. So as your income changes, your tax rate changes. And then based on this tax bracket structure, if your income is $150,000, how much do you pay in taxes, given the tax brackets? And then determine if that's progressive, proportional, or regressive. Okay, and then one more, similar to that one, where you have another tax structure where based on your income, the tax rate changes. And so you're going to calculate the marginal and average tax rates based on this income bracket tax structure. So determine total taxes paid again, and then marginal tax and average tax, and then finally note if this is a progressive tax or not. Okay, so questions on what you have to do for this homework, which is due next week. Everyone is okay on this? Okay, so can you go over how to set up the equation? Yeah. Okay, so yeah, let's do that. All right. So okay, so Dominic, you mean for the calculating the total tax paid, right, with the different tax brackets? Okay. Well, I'll just do one of these as an example. So let's just do one of the homework questions, and then hopefully that helps. So there's we'll do this one here. All right. So let's suppose there's no tax. All right. So this is one of your homework questions, but let's just do it together. So suppose there's no tax on the first 25,000 of income, but a 25% tax on earnings between 25,000 to 75,000, a 30% tax on income between 75,000 to 125,000, and then anything above 125,000 is taxed at 35%. Okay. So if your income is 150,000, let's calculate taxes. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is just kind of make a chart of the different tax rates so you can see what they are. So it says there's no tax on the first 25,000. Okay, then earnings between 25 and 75,000 are taxed at 30%. Okay, then income between 75,000 and 125,000 is taxed at, oh sorry, and then this is 25%. 30% tax on income between 75,000 and 125,000. Okay, then anything above 125,000 is taxed at 35%. Okay, so there's our tax structure, and let's use that to determine the taxes we'll pay if we make 125,000, or if we make 150,000. Okay, so if your income is 150,000 based on this tax structure, how much do you pay in taxes? So let's go through all the tax brackets. All right, starting with the first one. Okay, so let's start with the lowest bracket. So we pay 0% of the first 25,000, right? So we know it's going to come out to zero, but we have to put that in there for thoroughness. Okay, so the first part, let's quantify the different brackets. So the first one, you pay 0% of the first 25,000. Okay, and then the next bracket, you pay 25% of. 25% of. Okay, so let's make sure that we understand what's going on. So what goes in here? How much income do we get taxed at 25%? So how much income is taxed at 25% for this example? So it's the whole income range, right? So since we covered that whole bracket, how much goes into that bracket? So how much total income is in this range? Okay, or what's 75,000 minus 25,000? That's the one. Yeah, exactly. 50,000. Okay, and then we're gonna pay 30% of this income in this range. Okay, so how much goes into this? How much is taxed at 30%? Yeah, 50, right. Okay, and then finally, only income earned above 125,000 is taxed at 35%, so we tax the remainder of our income at 35%. Okay, so how much is left to be taxed at 35%? See, this plus this plus this, and then plus the rest have to sum to 150,000. So how much is left after we've covered? So what's the additional amount taxed at 35%? Okay, so what's left is 25,000. So, see, let me see if I'll make a new column so we see what, so how about total income? Okay, so see, the sum of the total income tax has to be 150,000. So the first bracket is the first 25,000, and the second bracket, there's $50,000 that gets taxed in this range at 25%. And then there's another 50,000 from this whole range that gets taxed at 30%. Okay, and so the rest is 25,000, right? So this whole, the total income tax paid in all the different brackets has to sum to the total. Oh wait, yeah, that's right. Okay, so see how 25,000 goes here, another 50,000 goes here, another 50,000 goes here, and then the extra or the remaining 25,000 goes here, and so this total is 150,000, right? So then the total taxes paid go like this. So this part's taxed at 0%, this part's taxed at 25%, this part's taxed at 30%, and the rest, and remember it has to sum to 150,000 or whatever the total income is taxed at 35%. So if you did this whole calculation, you would get, you'd get 36,250. Okay, is that clear? Did we say how to do that based on the tax rates and the tax brackets? Okay, good. So just make sure you do it like this. Okay. Yeah, okay. Great. Yeah, so make sure, you account for the fact that your total income has to sum up, to whatever the total income is. So when you tax the extra amount in the final bracket, just tax the remainder and make sure your total sums to whatever it is. So here it sums to 150,000, and then down here it's going to have to sum to 250,000. Yeah. Okay. So any more questions on the homework assignment? Okay. So if everyone is good on that homework assignment, are you welcome? Yeah. So make sure that the elasticity homework is due today. And so if you haven't turned in the chapter 4 homework, turn that in here. This one, the taxes homework for chapter 5 is due next Wednesday. Okay, so put that one in there and let me know if you have questions on that one. Okay, so chapter 4 homework due today. This one, chapter 5 homework due next Wednesday. Then next week, we'll do a review session, no new chapters. We'll do some practice problems, review for the exam. Then I'll just post the take-home midterm, and that'll be due the following Wednesday, October 7th. Okay, so if everyone is good on chapter 4 homework for today, chapter 5 homework for next week, then I think that's it for tonight. And so please come next time because we'll do a review for the exam, and I'll give you your midterm exam, which is take home. But yeah, I think that's it for tonight. Thanks everyone for coming and asking questions about the homework. So enjoy the rest of your week, and I'll see everyone the same time next Wednesday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.